So when I first started the Luke Beasley Show, one of the things I promised in kind of my announcement and in my subsequent articulations of what my show was all about was that not only would I tell you my view and would I be honest about the facts that I present, I would also make an effort to address views from the other side and take them seriously and try to interact with them and not just ignore things that I thought were illegitimate or even just a talking point from the other side, and really give it the time of day in my own head. And then if there was some sort of value to discussing it, bring it forward to all of you. And so I'm wanting to do that right now with the whole Hunter Biden stuff. Recently, a movie's coming out by Breitbart, which is a very, very dishonest right-wing network that is kind of like this based on a real story type movie, or characters obviously acting. It's not a documentary, but it's supposed to be based on the relationship between Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and the corruption that they believe happened in between the two of them. And it's very dramatic and all those things and lots of fake narratives being driven, but it has kind of re-engaged that conversation around Hunter Biden. And if you're someone who's on the right watching this right now, I'm actually going to give a lot of credit to certain parts of the Hunter Biden story. So hold, because that's why I'm doing this entire story, is to honestly, especially kind of what I promise is to be intellectually honest. So that's what I want to do with this, in addressing this story. Okay. So that movie that's coming out, as well as a recent clip that circulated from the Joe Rogan podcast of Mark Zuckerberg saying that Facebook was asked or reminded by the FBI to look out for misinformation right before the Hunter Biden story dropped. It's just caused this kind of big blow up of the conversation around Hunter Biden. So just to give you context about why this is again in the news, I'm going to show you this moment from Joe Rogan, but then I'm doing an entire segment breaking down what's true and not true at this very given moment in relation to Hunter Biden. So first, let's watch this.
So we took a different path.
That's the voice of Mark Zuckerberg for our podcast listeners talking about his company's interaction with the FBI right before the Hunter Biden story dropped in 2020.
And Twitter. Basically the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team. It was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. We thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant. So
that's the moment that has caused a bunch of people to falsely claim this is the FBI forcing Facebook to censor the Hunter Biden story. No. In the lead up to the 2020 election, the FBI had it on good authority to believe there was going to be lots of misinformation. And what we saw in the 2016 election, whether you're right, left, or center, or you think Russiagate is the biggest, fake story that's ever happened or whatever, you have to recognize there is an insane amount of evidence, verified evidence that yes, Russia was attempting to spread misinformation. Now, that doesn't mean that Trump was elected illegitimately. Nope, not at all. For many, many, many decades, countries try to interfere with other countries' elections by spreading misinformation, spreading talking points. It should be addressed. I think it's bad. I think it's interesting to ask, why would Russia want Trump as president? But it doesn't mean Trump wasn't rightfully elected, okay? But it is something our federal agencies should be concerned with. And so they had it on good authority, whether related directly to the Hunter Biden story or just generally because the 2020 election was coming up, that this would be happening again. And Facebook, as well as other social media platforms, should be on the lookout for. So saying that to Facebook, I think is perfectly reasonable. This is not at all an example of some big cover up, especially because at that time, the FBI was under the control of a Trump appointed director, right? So kind of weird to believe this is Biden somehow covering up the Hunter Biden story. So that meant really nothing to me. I don't know why it went so viral. It makes sense that a agency that's trying to fight back against misinformation or is investigating those types of interactions from other governments would warn social media sites. There was no threat in there. There was no even tone of Zuckerberg's voice that would indicate the FBI was really attempting to threaten his company to cover up some story. Okay, so that can be set aside. But now let's just get into the meat of Hunter Biden why it became such a big story, and what I think is true and not true about it. So the first thing that caused alarm, especially on the right, and what I'll do a lot in this segment is say, here's what I think is true, and here's why I think the right is either getting it wrong or why we don't believe them initially. So throughout a lot of this, as I'm going through and researching over the weekend, all of the different, nitty gritty parts of this story, I realize why the right is not being believed is like everyone's initial reaction whenever they put out a story like this. It's because the way that they gather and put out information is incredibly dishonest, and they have this long track record. And so for me, if I go to a media network that's reporting on Hunter Biden, and they're also the same media network that's pushing out the election being stolen, it's hard to take the Hunter Biden story at face value. So I got to dig into it, and I got to question a lot of the elements, right? Whereas a more legitimate media source may be able to give me easier facts to break down without having to fact check every tiny little word that's in there. So I would beg the right to take a lesson from this and think, y'all got to be more honest if you want to be taken seriously when you make claims like the ones you're making. The other big takeaway from this, watching the right and their kind of interfacing with this topic, is you don't understand how evidence works. So there's some evidence, some very clear evidence to why Hunter Biden did some wrong things and why Joe Biden should have acted differently. There really is. Then y'all take things and pretend that it's the same amount of legitimacy to a claim that has not even close to the same amount of evidence. Just because you can prove Hunter Biden did one thing wrong or Joe Biden should have acted different in this way doesn't mean all the next claims you're going to make are true. Okay. So we'll get into all that, but those are some upfront things that I feel like the right did wrong on this. But then the left, I will concede to the right, cared about the story less than we probably would have cared if this was, Ivanka Trump and the exact same facts that line up. Okay. And so we'll get into all of that. Starting off, the thing that originally created alarm was Hunter Biden, someone who probably isn't qualified to have this position, got a really bougie, director type position, board of director type position at one of the largest energy companies in Ukraine. And at that point in time, Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States and also was the point person within the Obama administration, for Ukrainian policy. So, again, while I'm someone who doesn't think this story is everything people play it up to be, definitely recognize why that causes alarm, why that is not something that a vice president should allow to happen. For him to be the point person on a country and have to make decisions and encourage the administration to do things that would directly affect a massive energy company that his son is involved with, and granted his son definitely wouldn't have gotten that position otherwise, presents a massive conflict of interest. Humongous. I totally agree when people say that, okay? Again, we're going to get to where they start getting dishonest. But as of that point in time, if you want to make a claim and say there was a huge conflict of interest between Joe Biden as vice president and this energy company in Ukraine, because they clearly just gave Hunter Biden that job and paid him a bunch of money for it because his last name was Biden, you are totally right on that. And that makes me lose a lot of respect for Joe Biden, somebody who lately I've been giving tons of credit to and have been gaining tons of respect for. One of the big defenses that the Biden administration, or not the administration, Biden on the campaign trail when this was brought up said was, Hunter Biden's a private citizen. He can work for whatever company he'd like. We don't have control over that. Nope. Not appropriate. You're the vice president. You do have to demand certain things of your family. Same thing with the Trumps, right? I think Jared Kushner going to Saudi Arabia, getting this multi-billion-dollar investment that he definitely did not make a good enough case for why he deserved that. But it was encouraged by the Saudi Arabian government for that to be given to him, is a similar situation where, was Trump a part of that? No. Zero evidence to say that Donald Trump was directly involved in that. But Jared Kushner going and doing that definitely presents a conflict of interest if Trump were to get back in power, and Jared Kushner being someone who is at the top of that administration previously. So same thing with Biden. You have to demand of your family members whatever it takes, that they don't put you in a situation where that blatant of a conflict of interest is present. So I totally agree with anybody, right, left, or center, who makes the claim that there was a big conflict of interest there, and that is a character flaw, is a moment of losing respect for Joe Biden, losing some level of respect for Joe Biden, and definitely for Hunter Biden. Because while Joe Biden might have felt like, oh, I don't know if I can do something about Hunter Biden feeling like he was justified in doing that, and knowing that he was using his name to get paid big bucks for a position he shouldn't have, and putting his dad in a situation where there was an obvious conflict of interest there, is insane. Now, a quick, kind of footnote. Another moment to critique the right here. One of the things that y'all did that was really upsetting, and y'all continue to do, is pretend like the mainstream media, like liberal media, doesn't cover any of these stories. I just spent the weekend looking into everything related to Hunter Biden, and a ton of mainstream media outlets covered this. What are y'all talking about? I mean, they're honest about when there's evidence, when there's not, but they'll say these claims are being made, these claims are true, these claims aren't, and these are, we don't know yet type vibe. And so much of the information that has been reported on, that was unearthed about Hunter Biden and his dealings, came from what you would consider to be liberal outlets. So I don't know what y'all are talking about. Again, incredibly dishonest. Y'all want to believe something that isn't true, and it's really upsetting to watch. So with that being said, yes, he definitely had that position. He shouldn't have had it. Presented a conflict of interest. Again, tons of liberal media outlets made that clear and said every expert we talked to who oversees situations like this, who has researched it historically, says that this presents a massive conflict of interest. Okay, so then the step 2 claim then is Joe Biden was in coordination with Hunter Biden to corruptly do things to benefit Hunter Biden and possibly also financially benefit Joe Biden. That is what there is not significant evidence for. So one of the things that was claimed is that Joe Biden fired this particular prosecutor in Ukraine, or pressured the Ukrainian government to fire him, or fire them, because Hunter Biden wanted that to happen. Again, I beg the right, if you're going to make claims, massive claims about the president of the United States being all corrupt or being corrupt while he was vice president, you need to do the proper work. So if you look into the situation at that time, the broad U.S. government stance on that prosecutor, as well as international, entities outside the United States that were allied with the United States, all were had consensus that prosecutor should be fired. So Biden, very little decision making in that. He had to go and communicate what was already the stance of the U.S. government broadly and our allies across the world. So I beg y'all to look into stuff like that, because that is not an example of Joe Biden, based on his relationship with his son, who had a position in Ukraine that I admit was very inappropriate, but that's not an example of him being corrupt. Again, though, I understand why you want to believe that, and I understand why Biden is set up to look that way. And that's why I blame Joe Biden for a lot of this, because, dude, really? You're going to allow your son to have that position of power in a country where you're the point person? Oh, of course you're going to set up a situation where the opposition to you can make a story like they're making. It really upsets me. They're going to spread misinformation about you, but don't let there be even a kernel of truth to the claims they're making. It's really irritating on the part of Joe Biden, that he allowed this to happen, or that there wasn't a detailed documentation that he knew he had to make of him denouncing his son for being in that position. That's what you should do if you really feel like you can't get your son to step down. It's really, because he's using your position of power, dude. Really? He's using your name to get him a bougie position. And the other part of this is Hunter Biden, in some of the communications that have been unearthed between him and other members of this company in Ukraine, makes it clear that he definitely was trying to pretend like he did have some authority over Joe Biden. Like he did have some sort of tight relationship with Biden, and Biden would, follow some of the moves that Hunter Biden wanted to make. I do think that Hunter Biden was trying to play that up. Again, there's just not evidence that Biden did something in response to Hunter Biden's requests or in response to the interests of this company. Biden did what was in line with the interests of the United States at that time and the interests of the United States relationship with Ukraine and companies within it at that time, right? And so I have not seen any secure, good evidence of Joe Biden doing something that was definitely, based on that conflict of interest. Again, that conflict of interest is there, so I understand why you would think that may be happening, and there's just not much evidence to prove anything actually happened wrong based on the actions that Biden had, the authority that he had. There was no chance for him to use that authority that was borne out to have helped this company that Hunter Biden was involved with. But I think Hunter Biden was definitely trying to play that up, was definitely trying to say, hey, my dad's the vice president. I could help you guys out. That's why you should keep me here. That's why you should, give me favorable treatment. I actually totally think that's what Hunter Biden was doing. And that's why I have very little respect for Hunter Biden. Now, again, I don't actually think that reflects on Joe Biden's decision making in his governance, but it does reflect on his decision making in this relationship and his allowance for that to happen and to put him in that position. That was very, very bad judgment on the part of Joe Biden. Okay. So I think that kind of wraps up the main claims. Another thing that is happening in relation to Hunter Biden to show there's not some big conspiracy to protect Hunter Biden is right now he's being investigated for tax fraud type stuff. And it looks like he might be prosecuted for it. So he may actually get charges brought against him for his bad tax practices, which I totally support. If he did things wrong on that front, to hold him accountable. So to sum it all up, Hunter Biden went to Ukraine, got a position at an energy company, setting up a situation where Joe Biden is obviously going to be seen as having a massive conflict of interest because he did have one. Then when you analyze the details of the decision-making of Biden while he was vice president, it isn't borne out that because of that relationship, he made corrupt dealings, he made corrupt decisions. So in that sense, I don't impeach the character of Joe Biden, but I do impeach the character of Joe Biden based on his ability to allow his son to hold that position, knowing that it would present that conflict of interest. Hunter Biden, all the blame can go his way for doing that. That was a very, very low character move. He was putting his dad in a very bad situation. And I think he just cared about himself in that situation. He knew he could get paid big bucks for having the last name Biden, and he took that chance. And that is disgusting to me. Very disgusting. Because you're setting up a situation where maybe anything good that was done by the Obama administration in relation to Ukraine or Joe Biden, and his ability to, do something good in the future politically, whatever it was, you're setting up a situation where all that's jeopardized. And Joe Biden has such a less position now to speak on the behalf of conflict of interest in other cases, like Donald Trump. Donald Trump had so many conflict of interests with who was involved in his administration and who were being dealt with outside of his administration within his family, and Ivanka and Jared and all the things they were doing outside the administration, and that setting up a conflict of interest was president. But Joe Biden, dude, you have a very, very similar situation. Now, which one you think actually led to corruption is a different question. But understanding the right is going to be very critical of you. And I think the left can be critical of the lapse in judgment that you must have had, or hopefully not, but it could have been actively prioritizing the financial gains of your son over this bad appearance of a conflict of interest. So to continue with my summary, the corrupt dealings not having happened is good. Conflict of interest being there is bad. Hunter Biden benefited financially from his dad's position, which I think is bad. I think he should try to stay out of situations like that at all possible. That should be the priority when you're the son of someone that powerful. Now, you can go live a fun life. You can go live your own life, do your own things. It's not all about your dad's position. But when you're using his position to benefit you, now it is about caring about that position. So, and then now that I'm saying all that, lots of the claims being made by the right aren't true. And I plead with them, if you want to make this story something that the general public cares about, you got to be intellectually honest, because as I'm doing now, you can present the parts that are there and the parts that are backed up without making a bunch of false claims about what hasn't been backed up. And then the fact that y'all obsess over Hunter Biden's drug addiction and his, dealings with prostitutes and stuff like that takes away, again, a lot of your credibility, because how does that reflect on Joe Biden? Why do we care about Hunter Biden's drug addiction? That's something that Hunter Biden and his family need to figure out. That's something that Hunter Biden himself has to take care of, and I support him in trying to take care of that. Same thing with the prostitution. That's something that Hunter Biden could be held accountable for if it was illegal, where he was doing it. And that's something that Hunter Biden needs to deal with. Why is that at all something you bring up in the conversation around possible corruption? I don't know. A lot of you guys, I don't know who you is, who you is. I don't know who I'm really directing this towards, because obviously any viewers of this show probably didn't do this, but whoever was leaking photos of Hunter Biden and, smoking crack and stuff, that just to me is so irrelevant to this conversation. If you're trying to make a claim about Joe Biden being corrupt. So I hope people, viewers of mine on the left, which is obviously my primary audience, respect that I wanted to do this, because there is some importance to the conversation, but why it gets ignored a lot is because so many of the claims being made about this are false. So, that's on the right. Y'all shouldn't make so many false claims all the time. And again, I'm not going to believe what you're saying about this story. And that's why it took me forever to figure out, the depth of the truth in all these different, claims being made, because you're the same people who say the election was stolen. And that, time and time again, has been proven to be false. And so, as well as many other false claims y'all make. So if you want to be taken seriously, you got to make true claims. And also, yes, the mainstream media has reported on this story and has been the ones finding the facts that then y'all take and blow out of proportions. They're the ones actually getting the good information, that allows us to know what the truth is. Anyways, wild stuff. So there's the breakdown, as I see it, of Hunter Biden, and more information could come out. Mainstream media outlets, as we speak, are still looking into all the details. But as it sits now, that's the summary. And that's what you should know about the whole Hunter Biden shenanigans.